Tell us the key findings so far.
Well, I mean, we've known for a long time that it's an extraordinary coincidence that the coronavirus emerged in Wuhan, which is the place where there is a laboratory holding the biggest collection of coronaviruses in the world. And that these viruses are normally thought to have come originally from South China, which is probably about 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. So it's quite something that of all the places in China that could have emerged, it emerged in Wuhan. What we've been looking at recently, and I think we have an awful lot more information than when we first visited this subject back in 2020, is that the Wuhan Institute were carrying out a series of very kind of dangerous experiments. They were taking viruses that they got from the bat caves, and they were splicing them together to see if they could actually make them more dangerous, so that they were in effect creating things that might cause a pandemic. And they were doing this I mean, the work was well-intentioned. The reason they were doing it was to try and find out what might happen to viruses in a cave if they mingled within the bats. But in effect, what they were doing was they were making some of these coronaviruses much more infective and much more deadly to people. And they were doing it in biosafety levels, which were very, very low level. I mean, there was one experiment they did, which they then tested on mice, and it killed 3/4 of the mice in something like 2 weeks. So this was a very, very dangerous pathogen, and experts we've spoken to say that this was probably the most dangerous experiment that was going on. And then, if you know that, and the fact that the virus then emerges in Wuhan, it kind of builds up a case to suggest that the virus may have originated from the laboratory.
Jonathan, is there any circumstantial evidence, or indeed any hard evidence, to say that perhaps the Chinese government were thinking of bioweapons in conjunction with the experimentations on COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, the Americans, we've spoken to senior people in the American administration who do believe that for a long time, China's been moving towards bioweapons. And what we can see, and it's quite there is evidence that the Wuhan Institute was working alongside the Chinese military on some of these experiments. And that we've spoken to investigators who tell us that that some of these, some of the experiments were out there. They were kind of, we know about them, we can see them in scientific papers. But around about 2016, a lot of this trail went dead. And the American investigators tell us that that the Wuhan Institute and the Chinese military started working on a secret project, which is that they were working on a coronavirus that had been found in a mine in 2012, which was the kind of a news blackout over. And what was significant about that particular coronavirus was that it was found in a place where 6 people had been clearing out the mine, and they had all been infected with a coronavirus-like illness. All had to go to hospital. 3 of them died. And what we understand from the investigators is that this particular group of coronaviruses, which in fact later turn out to be from the very lineage of COVID-19, the COVID-19 virus, and they're kind of the closest known relatives to the COVID-19 virus, were being worked on right up to, kind of November 2019 when the pandemic started.
Jonathan, will we be ever able to tell exactly where the origins of COVID-19, or let me be more specific, the origins of the pandemic. Perhaps we don't know where the virus began, but at least where the pandemic began. You've got a really interesting heat map, if I can put it that way, on the website and in the paper of the cases around the wet market around Wuhan and around the Virology Institute, which is quite a way away in the city of Wuhan. And there's many, many more cases around the Virology Institute than there are around the wet market. I mean, could we at any point be definitive in saying, look, actually, it leaked from a lab rather than it spread through the wet market?
I think. I mean, all the kind of the circumstantial evidence around it suggests that the lab leak theory is very, very strong, and there is virtually no evidence to suggest that it kind of leaked from a cave 1,000 miles away, kind of somehow traveled to Wuhan in an animal. I think the difficulty we have with it is that the WHO tried to send an investigation team in there. They didn't do very much. They just was back in January 2021. They just asked the institute a couple of questions and off they went, just accepting the answers. The problem we have is how you'd ever get access to kind of all the work that the Wuhan Institute was doing, because a lot of the work has never been published, is not known. A lot of the viruses they could have been working on, because they collected so many. I mean, I think it was something like 20,000 samples they collected at one point. They were blitzing the caves and the mine and taking them back to Wuhan. And so I think it's always going to be difficult to get to the bottom of this, because China is not complicit in helping.